And welcome back, everyone, to another episode of The Furnace Remnant. Today, being that this is Holy Week, we're going to do an episode today, kind of centered on that. Um, we're going to be talking today about three spectacles: the triumphal entry, the cross, and the return. When the final days of Jesus' life are read carefully and in sequence, a pattern begins to emerge that is easy to miss if each moment is treated in isolation. There are multiple public moments where everything becomes visible, where private identity, expectation, and spiritual reality are forced into open view. These are not quiet transitions. They are events witnessed, reacted to, and interpreted in real time. Three stand out with particular clarity: the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, the crucifixion and its theological interpretation as a public spectacle, and the future return of Christ described in prophetic texts. Each is public, each is visible, each is understood differently by those who witness it. What connects them is not similarity in form, but contrast in interpretation. So let's get into the triumphal entry, public recognition, and political expectation. The first moment is the triumphal entry, recorded across all four Gospels: Matthew 21, 1 through 11, Mark 11, 1 through 11, Luke 19, 28 through 44, and John 12, 12 through 19. Jesus enters Jerusalem riding on a donkey, intentionally fulfilling Zechariah 9, 9, which describes a coming king who is righteous, humble, and mounted on a donkey. The public reaction is immediate and intense. Crowds spread garments on the road, wave palm branches, and cry out Hosanna, a plea that carries the meaning of save now. But the significance of that moment is shaped by expectation. At Passover, Jerusalem is already a politically charged environment under Roman occupation. Messianic expectation at this time is not abstract or purely spiritual. It is deeply tied to historical longing for deliverance from foreign rule. Many in the crowd were not simply acknowledging Jesus as a religious figure, they were anticipating a decisive intervention in the existing political order. In other words, the expectation was not only that a Messiah would come, but that he would act in a visible, immediate way against the ruling authority of the time. Rome represented oppression, taxation, and control. A Messiah entering Jerusalem in that context could easily be interpreted as the beginning of confrontation. So the celebration is not neutral admiration, it is interpretive. The crowd is assigning meaning to what they are seeing. They are recognizing kingship but defining it in terms of political overthrow. This is what makes the moment so important. It is both correct in recognition and incomplete in understanding. Jesus is publicly received as king, but not according to the fullness of what that kingship entails. Okay, now moving on, we are getting into the crucifixion, a public event interpreted as defeat. The second moment is the crucifixion, which on the surface appears to contradict every expectation of victory established in the first moment. Yet Colossians 2:15 reframes it. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. The language used here is significant. It is not defensive or ambiguous. It is the language of conquest, disarming, public exposure, and triumph. And yet the scene itself presents nothing that resembles triumph in conventional terms. Jesus is arrested, beaten, mocked, crucified, and buried. To any observer within the historical moment, the interpretation is straightforward: failure, not victory. This creates a direct tension between visible experience and theological claim. The question is not whether the event is public, it is. The question is what is actually happening within that public event. Paul's language suggests that what is visible on the surface does not represent the totality of what is occurring. Beneath the physical and political reality is a deeper spiritual action involving the disarming of rulers and authorities. The language is also echoed elsewhere in Paul's writings. Ephesians 6:12 says, against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness. And Colossians 1:16 says, it's describing thrones, dominions, rulers, and authorities created through and for Christ. These references reinforce that rulers and authorities are not merely earthly systems, but also spiritual powers operating behind them. The result is a layered reading of the crucifixion. On the visible level, execution and humiliation. On the theological level, disarming and triumph. These two interpretations occupy the same moment but do not agree on what that moment looks like in real time. Where the public spectacle occurs, interpretive divergence. At this point, interpretation divides into multiple streams. One reading of Colossians 2:15 places the entire act of triumph at the cross itself. In this view, the crucifixion is not only the moment of suffering, but also the decisive moment of victory. The public spectacle is the cross as it stands in history, visible, earthly, and final. Another interpretive stream incorporates additional passages. 1 Peter 3:19 through 20, describing proclamation to spirits in prison. Acts 2:27, stating that Jesus was not abandoned to Hades. Ephesians 4:9, referring to descent into the lower regions. Within this framework, the crucifixion is still the moment of victory, but the effects of that victory extend beyond the moment itself. The language of descent, and proclamation is understood as part of the aftermath of triumph, an extension of its declaration into the realm of death or the unseen. This leads to a distinction between the moment of victory and the declaration or manifestation of that victory in additional realms. However, across these interpretations, one point remains consistent. The powers opposed to God are defeated through the work of Christ. What differs is not the outcome, but the mechanics of how that outcome is understood to be displayed. And I would also like to add that some don't define the victory until the resurrection. And really, I guess the way I see things is I think it was all victory in different stages is the way that I look at it personally. Okay, let's look at the final one, the return, a fully visible and unambiguous revelation. The final moment in this pattern is not historical but prophetic, the return of Christ. Unlike the triumphal entry, which was public but misinterpreted, and unlike the crucifixion, which was public but misunderstood in real time, the return is described in terms of universal visibility and recognition. Revelation 1:7 states, every eye will see him. Matthew 24:30 describes the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Revelation 19:11 through 16 presents Christ as a conquering figure riding a white horse called Faithful and True, judging and making war in righteousness. The imagery is deliberately expansive. It is not localized or symbolic in a narrow sense. It is global in scope and unmistakable in meaning. Where the triumphal entry involved misunderstanding of kingship, the return involves no ambiguity. Where the crucifixion involved hidden victory, the return involves revealed authority. What was once debated in interpretation becomes universally acknowledged in perception. A pattern of revelation and misrecognition. When these three moments are placed together, a pattern becomes visible. The triumphal entry is a public recognition shaped by expectation of political deliverance. The crucifixion is a public execution that carries theological claims of hidden spiritual triumph. The return is a public revelation that removes ambiguity entirely. Each moment is visible. Each moment is witnessed. Each moment is interpreted differently in its time. The deeper thread connecting them is not simply that God acts publicly, but that public revelation does not guarantee correct recognition. In each case, what is seen is real, what is understood is what differs. The question that emerges from the pattern is not only what God is doing in each judgment, but how easily the meaning of those moments can be misread while they are unfolding. So, what you're left with is a pattern that repeats across time. Visibility does not guarantee understanding, and recognition does not guarantee comprehension. The crowd gets the entry right, but the meaning wrong. The world sees the crucifixion but misreads the victory. And the return is described as the moment where misunderstanding finally collapses under full revelation. And maybe the deeper question underneath all of this isn't just theological, it's personal. How often do we assume we understand what we're seeing when we're actually only seeing part of it? That's where I'll leave it. This has been the Furnace Remnant.